guys, it's Alice, and today it is time to review the books I read in the first part of August. The first book that I finished was The Lost Man by Jane Harper. This is a mystery novel. It's set in the Australian outback, and one of three brothers has died under the unrelenting sun on their vast property. And the family who are left behind are trying to figure out if the man has simply committed suicide or if there's something more sinister going on. I've read several books by Harper now, and she is just so good. She never disappoints, and this was just fantastic. The story starts off right away with a dead body, an amazing setting, and really interesting characters. The mystery in here is really clever, and I loved trying to figure out what the hell was going on and what has actually happened. The characters in here, you sort of get to know them slowly, and it's so fascinating towards the end to see them reveal themselves. My favorite part about this, and all of Harper's books really, is the way that she is so good at creating atmosphere. The outback in this is described in such a way that it becomes so incredibly creepy, and she does this in all of her books. Like the previous one I read was set in the bush, and that has the exact same thing going on, and it's just so good. This is definitely one of my favorite books that I've read so far this year, and I actually gave it a 5 out of 5 stars, which is rare around here, so I would obviously highly recommend it. The second book that I read was The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan. This is a modern classic, and it's set in both China and America from the 1920s all the way up to the 80s, and the story is about 4 Chinese mothers and their daughters. I made a whole vlog all about reading this book, so I already feel like I've discussed it at length, so I'm not going to talk too much about it here, but overall I thought this was a really interesting book. My favorite parts of this book were the parts where we get to read about all the mothers' stories from their childhoods in China. And I really like how this book explores mother-daughter relationships and the sort of cultural difference between them. There are 7 viewpoints in this book, and I did really like the writing, but I thought some of the characters sort of blended into one another, and it was kind of hard to remember who was who. And that did kind of keep pulling me out of the story, which I didn't like as much. I think this book will definitely stay with me though, and that I'll keep thinking about it, so it's definitely worth a read, and I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. Second to last, I finished The Burning by Laura Bates. This is a YA novel, and it's about a teenage girl and her mother who has just arrived in Scotland, trying to start fresh and getting away from their old life. But it doesn't take long until whispers start in the school hallways, and the reason they needed to start fresh in the first place follows them to their new home. So I'm maybe not the target audience for this book, but I still really enjoyed it. It's super readable, and it brings up so many issues that I really appreciate. I think the importance of social media in the lives of people who are growing up these days is immense, and I really like that this book sort of takes a look at it and the possible dangers of it. The book talks a lot about slut shaming, double standards, and bullying, but it includes this new form of communication. And I feel like that sort of sets it very clearly in the present, and I really like that. I feel like a lot of books just sort of skirt around the whole issue because it's so big, but this takes it head on. I do think the story is a little bit messy sometimes, and it brings up so many issues that it doesn't have time to explore them all. And I think maybe some of those things could have been taken out, and it would have been a little bit of a sharper book. Some of the dialogue also felt a little bit unnatural, and I did think that the ending was a little too melodramatic. There's also this thing that happens in a lot of books, and I've started noticing it, and it just annoys me so much that every time I come across that sentence, I'm just like, oh. And it's the "I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding." I don't know why people keep writing that. That sentence needs to be eradicated. Anyways, I do think that the issues that I have with this book are probably just because I do read a lot and I am a little bit older, so I don't necessarily feel that connected to the characters, and maybe that makes me a little bit more critical. I do think though, for young readers, this is an amazing book because it brings up so many important things that we need to learn about and that we need to talk about. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars, and I would highly recommend it for any young readers. And if you have any like teenagers in your life, maybe buy them a copy of this. Lastly, I finished Chasing the Scream by Johann Hari. This is a non-fiction book, and it explores addiction, the war on drugs, and possible solutions as to how we may be able to help people and solve this problem. This was a really interesting book, and I have quite a lot of thoughts about it. The book spans several years and continents, and we take a look at the history of the war on drugs, which is still ongoing, and addiction in general. And we meet many different people, some of which are sort of historical characters and some of which are people that the author met during his travels. And I think hearing the stories of those people was my favorite part. I think exploring this topic through people's stories is a really clever way of adding humanity to the issue and making it easier to connect to. I also really liked reading about the beginning of the war on drugs and how it sort of spread across the world, because I didn't know any of that. I think this is an incredibly interesting topic, and it's important to be educated about it. But when I read reviews for this before I read it, I got the sense that this was going to be a complete game changer, and I thought it was going to offer up some sort of revolutionary ideas, and it didn't really do that for me. I did feel like I learned a lot, especially about the history of the war on drugs. And maybe I just know more about this because I know that I've researched it when it's come up for discussion in the Norwegian government and stuff. But there's a part of me when I was reading this that thought, do people really not know any of this? I do think this book is a little bit dense in parts, and one thing I really don't like about it, and this is a thing that annoys me in some nonfiction books, and it's when an author writes about a historical figure and writes as if we can know what they were thinking and feeling and what their intentions were without really having a source for it. I know that that probably makes it easier to understand and you feel like you get to know that historical figure, but we don't really know, do we? Overall though, I do think this book is fantastic in the way that it gathers up all of this information about addiction, the use of drugs, and the consequences of the war against it. And I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I think it's definitely worth a read if you just want to learn a little bit more about this topic or you don't have a lot of knowledge or experience about it. I think this is a good book to read because it sort of gives a human face to addiction. Now, I'm currently only reading one book, and it's this, Golden Hill by Frances Spufford. This is a historical fiction novel set in New York, and I'm not really that far into it yet, but I'm excited about it. Okay guys, those were all the books that I had to talk about today. I'd love to know what you all have been reading lately, as always, and I will see you soon. Bye!